Perspectives on Navigating Higher Education as BIPOC and First-Generation College Students by Ana Antora, Kimberly Garcia, and Anaí Cruz.
Thank you so much, Ebony, for the introduction. Hi, everyone. My name is Anna. I'm the program coordinator and in charge of student communications here at Let's Go to College, California. Today, our team will be presenting, as Ebony said, talking a little bit about beyond the financial aid application. So we all are pretty aware, obviously, right, that the financial aid application is one of the most important process steps to getting into college. However, there are other important things that sometimes get overlooked as BIPOC and first-gen students navigating the college experience. So we're gonna go ahead and get started. So welcome, Kimberly.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. So excited to be here with everyone. And today we're going to do an icebreaker to kind of get to know each other and set the tone for this presentation. What is an affirmation that gets you through the day? So something you practice, a mantra, a saying that you say to yourself. Go ahead and drop it in the chat and we'll be highlighting some. So for example, mine is, I will do great today and I will try my best. And that just basically encourages myself to do the best. So I see someone said kick ass and take names. I love that. Refuse to stink. That's amazing. Si se puede. That's an amazing one as well, and one that's very practiced in my household. Opportunities will always come my way. I love that. Show me how good it's gonna get. That's one that I see on social media lately. Thank you guys so much for sharing. I think it's important to practice these mantras and just really set the tone for the day. So thank you everyone for sharing.
Thank you. If y'all feel compelled to share your affirmation throughout the presentation, please do so. We want to make this a positive, fun, and light experience for you all. So we're going to keep it moving. So some of you may have heard of Let's Go, maybe some of you haven't. Let's Go is part of a project with SoCalCan, the Southern California College Access Network, which has been around for over 10 years. So Let's Go started in 2020 as a response to the pandemic. So as you know, the pandemic stopped a lot of in-person meetings, in-person trainings, everything in person. And so Let's Go began to help students apply to college, get to college, and stay in college. And we had to kind of get creative, right? Because everything was going virtual. People were experiencing like that burnout, everything on Zoom. However, we did start Let's Go. So Let's Go is the virtual resource hub for students navigating higher education. And we focus on the needs of underrepresented students across the state of California. And so there are several parts of Let's Go. One of the components is that obviously we provide support for students. So we always make it a point to put out resources and information that are relevant to students currently. We have put out information for financial aid, mental health needs, transfer options, what's going on your campus, like breaking news or anything you should know about. We also talk about any academic tips, how to make sure you're staying on top of your assignments, and also helping you make informed decisions about where you're going to college. So as you can see, you can scan our QR code right here if you want to take a look at our website. It's also just www.letsgotocollegeca.com. If someone can drop it in the chat box, that would be really helpful. And on our website, 4 of the most important components, as you can see, are applying for college tab, paying for college, online learning, and mental health. So in our applying for college, we basically we have a lot of blogs and resources for students who are first time applying to college for the first time. If they're applying as transfer students, there are several things on there that basically help you through the process. And so in Paying for College, you'll get information about the financial aid application and the process, which is the FAFSA, the California Dream Act. You'll get information on loans, work study, the benefits of work study, all different types of loans, so subsidized and direct, all the differences. And then also online learning, so kind of tips and ways to stay engaged, how to manage your online classes and stay on top of everything, as well as mental health, which is a big thing that we should all be prioritizing right now for ourselves and for our students and peers, just because there is a lot going on all the time. And so right there, we share tips for how to take care of yourself, but also resources where you can find therapists of color, therapists that you feel comfortable with, and just kind of sharing all those kinds of resources. And Let's Grow is also a big growing community. So one of the biggest ways that we've made an effort to connect with our students is through social media. So as you can see right here, we have our Instagram, we have a TikTok that we just started, and our newsletter. So we're able to stay connected through these social virtual platforms. And this way we're able to reach tons of students very easily, and keep them engaged. So if you want to go follow our Instagram or our TikTok, it's at Go to College CA, and you'll find all our stuff on there. And now we'll be introducing our team. So obviously you already heard me talking. So as I said, I'm Anna, and I'm the program coordinator and in charge of student communications here at Let's Go. And I'll be passing it over to my other two team members.
Hi, everyone. My name is Kimberly Garcia. I am the social media intern. A little bit about myself. I went to CSUN, Go Matadors. I studied broadcast journalism there, and you can also catch me on the air Monday through Friday in the mornings from 6 a.m. to 10 a.m. So it's an honor to be here speaking with you.
Hi everyone, pleasure to be here. My name is Anaí Cruz Bautista, and I am currently the social media and design intern for Let's Go to College. I am also wrapping up my last year at Cal, so go Bears. Kind of really excited to graduate, but I am currently also a sociology and education major, so looking forward to starting that career soon. And yeah, that's just a little bit about me.
Thank you so much, Anaí, for sharing a little bit about yourself. Today, we're going to touch on what imposter syndrome is and how that goes hand in hand with being a first-generation student. Here, I've highlighted some words and phrases that I think really stood out to me and that I hope can resonate with some of you. So we have our standard definition. Imposter syndrome for first-generation students can mean feeling like they're not worthy or deserving of being there. And with that comes mental health problems such as anxiety or depression. And oftentimes, first generation students are ones who lack emotional support from their families, and not only their families, but the institutions that they attend. So it's very hard to find those spaces where they feel that they can be vulnerable and share their experiences. And some examples of what students may go through is, for example, undermining their own achievements as they go through college, as they go through life, feeling insecurity in comparison to their other classmates, and a lot of self-doubt. And this is something that Anaí and I went through and that we're going to dive further into as well. So this is a little bit about Anaí. And Anaí, I know you attended Berkeley, and as you know, it's the #1 public university. So what communities did you find support in? Did you go to find like a safe hub for first generation POC students?
Yeah, so I started my educational journey at Berkeley in 2018. I came right after high school as a freshman, and honestly, I come from a low-income community in LA, and so being accepted into Berkeley was a huge accomplishment. And once that happened, I just kind of got encouraged to attend here, not really knowing much. Obviously, as a first generation student, I feel like um, sometimes we kind of go into things blindly because we don't have that much guidance compared to other students. And so I think I felt like I went into this kind of blindly, obviously with excitement and a lot of like pride because I did a lot to get here, but definitely wasn't knowing what I was getting into, I just thought like, I'm going into school, I'm going into a pretty good school, and I was just looking forward to that once I started. But then I started realizing the importance of, my background being first gen, being low income, being a student of color. I am also indigenous from Oaxaca, and so being Latinx and indigenous plays a huge role in like how I navigate this institution as well. And definitely, I think I center a lot of my conversations around imposter syndrome because it's something that affects a lot of students, especially our first generation students attending, predominantly white institutions or such prestigious institutions like Berkeley, being called the #1 public university comes with a nice title, but a lot of pressure. And so I think one of the one of the advantages that I did notice with attending such a big campus and such a prestigious campus is the amount of resources that come with it. Definitely, I think a lot of my friends and I pride ourselves in like taking advantage of these resources, whether they're academic, financial, emotional, all of that. I think we do our job in like looking for these resources, and like even if we don't take advantage of them, we have like even a group chat where we just send out these resources. If I'm not taking advantage of them, you like make sure you're taking advantage of them. And I really like that, like the communal love that has presented itself in like the friendships that I've made out here have really helped me navigate this institution because of how big it is and how lonely it sometimes could get. So obviously the communities here, we have a lot of communities. We have a lot of just ethnic communities as well, and then we have first gen, then we have low income, then we have indigenous students. And so I think the staff here at Berkeley tries to keep up with the student population on campus and with meeting the needs of all students. And obviously it's a work in progress. I don't think it's perfect. I don't think it's perfected at the moment, but definitely in terms of like the first gen, meeting the needs of first gen low income students, there's quite a few resources that I have taken advantage, and if it's not me, other of my friends who are also low income first generation have taken advantage of these resources. Some of them just include EOP, which I'm sure we've heard of, which is the Educational Opportunity Program, and this program provides academic counseling. I know I've gone there for mentoring and just kind of a support system. I really value EOP as well because um, the space on campus, I will tell you, like Berkeley is very white, and so going into like the EOP office specifically just kind of feels like I'm back home, kind of like in my high school like counselor's office, because it's a lot of POC out there. Specifically with academic counseling at Berkeley, sometimes it just feels weird myself as an indigenous student just kind of talking to a white counselor who doesn't understand like my ethnic background or my financial background. And so with EOP, the academic counselors that I've met with have been a little bit more understanding or more relatable to my upbringing. So that's also been really helpful, just making me feel at home. Then there's Berkeley Connect, which specifically is a thing that we have on campus here, and it kind of leads you to connect with professors, alumni, and other students on campus that share similar interests to you. So I myself, as a sociology and education major, have connected with like other alumni who have graduated from the Graduate School of Education, who like have helped me throughout my 4 years here, just seeing where I want to go and how I want to continue navigating Berkeley. And then we have like communal spaces, which I also am very much appreciative of because back in LA, I am very close to my community, and I think that's also one of the things that hit me the most with imposter syndrome was not having access to my community on campus here. Like I said, it's very white sometimes, especially just at the beginning. There's a lot of culture shock, and so one thing I definitely missed was like my brown people and like my community back home. And I think the communal spaces on campus, there's one called the Multicultural Community Center on campus, and they just provide like healing services and community programs that center underrepresented students, one of them being first gen, others being formerly incarcerated, just for a lot of students of color to take advantage of these resources through a communal hub that's in person. So that's one of the, I guess, resources that I value the most. And I feel like that's how I've been served, and like my community has been served on this campus was definitely through like the resources being offered either in person or online, now that COVID kind of changed a lot of like my educational trajectory because of it being half of it being online. So I think that was one of the ways that like Berkeley as a school has helped me feel better supported. Obviously, there's times where, as a first generation student, I feel like they could show up a lot more, definitely with the resources and the funding that they have. But at the moment, definitely it's like um, what community is what keeps me grounded and like what I've been able to find the most through these different resources that center first gen low income students.
Thank you so much, Anai, for sharing and for going in depth on this, the different resources offered at Berkeley. And I know you touched a little bit on this, but could you elaborate a little bit on your experience as a first gen low income student compared to your other classmates? How did that look like?
Yeah, I think in the classroom it's very specific too because it's definitely lonely. I think one of the first things that I thought about when I moved in here was like, it's nothing like my high school or nothing like the schools I've been to before. I grew up in LA, right in Pico Union, next to downtown LA. And so I just attended public schools from K to 12. And then no one really prepared me with like how white this space would be. And so when I entered campus, I think that's one of the first things I noticed, like the culture shock. Then when I entered the classroom, I think that's where it gets a little bit more real because it's such the classrooms here are big, and so you would expect a good majority to also be students of color, but it's not. It's a very small portion of my class. Very small portion are students of color, so it definitely feels lonely. I think I just kind of get overwhelmed with all the whiteness just because growing up in public schools, all my schools consisted of Latinx students. A small portion were also Black, but it was mainly Black and brown students navigating, public schools. And here it's a public school, but it's mainly white and Asian. And so it was all new to me, but I think um, it also just makes it harder when your professors are also white and not really aware of how other students are navigating the classroom. But I will say that when you have a professor of color, or even when you have students of color around you, it's also very comforting. I think, um, yeah, I felt lonely at first, especially in one of the few classes that I was taking my first semester here, being a freshman, just trying to navigate and like see what this space is like. Um, it was lonely, but then after I met some like cool students of color, I feel like I always make friends in my classrooms because of that, because it's so easy to pinpoint who's brown and like who's first gen, and like you kind of just get to know people through your classrooms. Even if my classrooms are like 200 students, I kind of just throughout the semester start to see the different students there. And so that helps with building like a strong connection because there's so few of you that you're like, okay, no, we have to stick together. And then I think for sure when it comes to having professors of color, it's just a different level of comfort because, I think visiting office hours and like asking for help just looks a lot differently. I think that's one of the things with like the classroom experience is asking for help. I think I was a lot more comfortable in high school just saying, "Hey, I need help with this," or "I can't do that," because my classes were like 20 students and it was just a teacher. But here they're like 200 students and it's a professor trying to keep up with all these students. Um, so it kind of makes it a little bit more intimidating. But then when you have a professor of color who will kind of relate to you, or even then, I know I've had conversations with my professors, and one of my professors who her name's Hema. She actually has been really like helpful with my educational journey here. She also shares she's Latina and just kind of saying she also studied at Berkeley prior to like becoming a professor here, and she said that that's one of the things she also relates to, like how white it is. And so now as a professor, when she teaches her classroom, she also very much like finds comfort in seeing students of color, and so we kind of like bonded over that. And I think that's one of the things that like there's some hardships to experiencing like this new classroom setting, but I think that's also one of the most rewarding things, like when you find someone who gets it, who understands, and especially a professor who is there to really serve your academic needs. I think it just feels different. So yeah, there's like ups and downs to it, but so far that's been my experience. And I think it's one thing that like makes it worth it. I think like the comfort and like just those bonds because they're so special, because they're so rare, it makes it worth it, you know?
Thank you, Anai. Thank you for sharing a little bit about your experience in the classroom. And I know you spoke a little bit about how your freshman year was really hard. Do you think there was a defining moment or like a turning point within your, you know, time at Berkeley that really changed?
Yeah, for sure. I think I would say during my second year of college is when I felt more comfortable. I think my first year I was like, okay, start getting used to just kind of this new environment and the culture. And then my second year, I kind of started in a more, it was different, obviously, entering my sophomore year because I kind of already knew the campus. I was already knowing what I was getting myself into compared to I think my first year I didn't know what I was getting myself into. And so my sophomore year, I started to integrate myself into these spaces. I got more involved with organizations, and I just found it important to start building community here in the Bay. Because, like I said, I'm very communal, but I think my first year I was like, this is not LA, this is not my home. It's just I'm here to study and go. And then my sophomore year, I was like, I think during the summer, I'm like, no, you're gonna spend 3 more years here, might as well, find community, make it your home, and you don't know what can come out of it. And so I just started kind of getting myself integrated into these spaces, and through that I joined different organizations on campus. I would do tutoring and like other extracurriculars around like Oakland and stuff like that. But I think one of the main turning points that or one of the instances that like really identified my turning point was me joining Brown Issues. And Brown Issues at Berkeley is a community organization. It's student led, and it's rooted in providing social and emotional support for our students of color, so primarily low income first gen Latinx students on campus. And I had heard really great things about Brown Issues. It was actually just starting up on my campus my second year. And so they were looking for new members, they were looking to just build community. And I had like been following them on Instagram. And being in, like I said, like being in such a white campus, like, and being like Latina, sometimes you miss these aspects of home, like the street vendors. I definitely miss the street vendors. I think Berkeley's such a different environment than LA, and a lot of other Latinx students have also identified that they miss like just the culture that they grew up around. And so with Brown Issues, that's one thing that they tried doing, because one of the first like vending or fundraising events that they had was selling conchas and champurrado on campus. And I remember seeing them on campus, just walking from class and seeing like just a bunch of brown students trying to sell conchas, and I'm like, wow, that kind of just reminds me of home. And so through that comfort, I like started introducing myself, and I just found a bunch of cool people through that org. And as I integrated myself, as I got more involved, I really found community through them. Up until now, this was my sophomore year. Now I've been serving with them for like 3 years, and they've become family. We've all kind of bonded in this conversation of like the different challenges that we face being first gen, being Latinx in a predominantly white institution. And so a lot of them are also formerly incarcerated or system impacted, and transfer students or student parents. And I really appreciated the different backgrounds that we all came from, because it really allowed us to bond and see that we're traditionally underrepresented students, and that makes us feel more at home with each other. Um, and so through our conversations, topics like imposter syndrome and other challenges that we would face being, students of color at this campus would be brought up and acknowledged within our conversations. And through this, I realized like, okay, like I'm not the only one going through, imposter syndrome. I'm not the only one feeling like I'm not deserving of taking up space here, because sometimes it does feel really, really difficult just continuing, because there's a lot of challenges that come with like just studying here. But then you find communities like the community I found at Brown Issues, and we start having these conversations, and we start feeling less lonely. And so through that, I think I felt more comfortable being at Berkeley, because I'm like, okay, I'm not the only one going through this. And now I have a support system, because obviously as we express like, oh, we've gone through that, or we know what that's like, we know how hard it is to overcome that. um, we provide a support system for each other, and we kind of just check in with each other up until now. We do a really good job at just checking in with each other, making sure we balance like our emotional and mental like well-being with school. And so I think that's where I really like finding brown issues and then finding other orgs such as Oaxaca, which, as I mentioned before, I'm indigenous from Oaxaca. And so this org specifically is an organization for Oaxacan students and other indigenous students on campus. I think working with such a cultural org like that as well has helped me feel like I have family out here and like I have true community. And so I think through that, like just my second year on, like there's been a lot of turns where I'm like, okay, no, this was the right choice for me, because my first year with Imposter Syndrome, I'm like, was Berkeley the right school? And then after my second year where I really started to get involved is where I'm like, no, I know I was here, I was meant to be here for a reason, I have community and I have like a good support system. And so yeah, like I am meant to take up space here. And I think those reminders are really nice within my friend group. But I would definitely say after my first year, it's just kind of like where I felt more comfortable navigating this system as well. Yeah. It's just a matter of getting through the first year.
Thank you so much for sharing, Anai. I know you touched on organizations that really helped build a sense of community for you in school. And you also mentioned a professor that really impacted your experience as a first generation student. What can educators do to support students going through the first generation experience?
Yeah, I think for sure, just checking in. I think one of the things with like educators and counselors here at Berkeley is we're a lot of students, and I'm fully understanding that it's hard to keep track of each and every one of us, because like I said, it's very different compared to high school. It's not like you have 20 kids that you have to keep track of. It's a lot. And through meeting with my counselors, I've had a good experience with some counselors. Some counselors have also just been more like, okay, I'm just here to like help you with this, and then like we could keep it pushing. And that's where I feel like they could do a little bit of a better job making it more personal. And again, I think just recognizing like we're all dealing with a lot. Counselors and like educators have to keep track of a lot of students, but also just finding little things within the conversation to make it personal, to make it about more than just academia. Just checking in. I think just a simple check-in could do a lot, and even just asking questions about genuinely trying to get to know the student can impact a lot. Because I think especially as a freshman, I would say if you're a counselor and an educator, keep an eye on like the freshmen or the newly transfer students, because it is hard. I think especially that's where you're the most vulnerable when it comes to imposter syndrome. So just acknowledging like it's their first year, they're probably dealing with a lot. A simple check-in can do a lot. Like, hey, how are you doing? What's going on? Or how is this new transition looking like for you? I think if someone would have asked me that, I would have been completely honest and be like, look, it's really hard right now. Can you help me? Because I think one of the things with imposter syndrome that makes it harder is like asking for help. And so instead of having to directly ask for help, having someone also approach you or even just check in can kind of segue into them asking for help. And I think that could change a lot. So I would say that'd be the main thing, like just checking in, something small, but something so like that could change a lot.
Yes, thank you so much for sharing, Anai. And I know we do have a lot of educators on the Zoom call, so if anybody has any questions, feel free to drop them in. But yes, thank you so much for sharing, Anai.
Thank you, Kimberly. And then now, yeah, definitely thank you. We love centering the conversation also on imposter syndrome because we find it very important to acknowledge. One of the challenges that first generation POC students face on campus, but we also hand in hand we see that mental health and self-care work together, and it's one thing that has been really centered in conversations now, because the topic of mental health definitely um, centers itself in preserving one's emotional well-being. And so with that, we recognize that with being a college student, there's a lot that we have on our plate, there's a lot that we have in our schedules, there's a lot that we kind of take on, and with that we can easily forget to prioritize our mental health and self-care. And so we wanted to recognize that through this presentation as well, because it's one of the things that we need to start acknowledging more. And like through starting these conversations, we hope to encourage other students to really continue to prioritize their mental health and self-care, because it's some simple things within your self-care that can really affect your mental health if you let go of these habits. and that works hand in hand with your academic achievements and like your workflow, because if you're not right, I don't think anything else that you produce can be 100% right, because you're not mentally, there. And so we find it crucial to like emphasize that and make it a priority for all students. Just some simple examples of self-care include getting 7 to 8 hours of sleep. I know it's something so small, but something we can easily neglect. I myself as a student am very honest sometimes with my schedule gets to be a lot, and sometimes I sacrifice my sleep to submit an assignment, or and I think that's kind of toxic in terms of like the work culture that we have as students, where we kind of pride ourselves in like these all-nighters and like these weekly, like routines of just not getting enough sleep. And I think that could be very dangerous, because we encourage others to not get enough sleep, and that could have a lot of effects on one's mental well-being, and also in general just staying hydrated and taking time to make a meal for yourself, and ensuring that you get at least 2 to 3 meals in a day, and like snacking throughout, just staying well fed and staying hydrated, because again, like if you don't take care of your body, and you neglect it, the work that you are producing won't be 100%, because your body is not at 100. So we just wanted to also introduce this conversation through this presentation. And with that being said, we can move on, and I will also be asking Kimberly some questions in regards to this topic. Um, and so one of the things we for sure just want to talk about and touch base on is the importance of mental health. And so, Kimberly, I think just one of the questions I do have for you was, if there was a particular moment in college where you realized the importance of prioritizing your mental health and maintaining, these self-care habits, or do you think it's something you've always known to prioritize? I know sometimes this like realization of mental health and self-care comes differently for students, so I kind of just wanted to see where you were at the start of your college career and at the end. And yeah, just wanted to check in and like when that realization came for you.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing about mental health, Anaí. I think it's definitely important to talk about, and especially within the Latinx culture, it's something that's often neglected and pushed to the side. So it's always important to highlight it. And I just want to say, before my experience at CSUN is very different from the one that you shared. I think in CSUN, the majority of students are students of color. And so there is a lot of support at my school, and I always felt at home. It's literally 10 minutes from my house. It's a different experience than being away from home. But while I was in college, I went through a lot. Now reflecting, I feel like I wasn't as kind to myself as I should have, and realizing just how much I endured all while being in school is definitely admirable. But for example, I'm the oldest and the first student to go to college, so it's already a lot to have on your back, knowing the pressures of going to school and knowing that your siblings are looking after you. So that in itself is a lot. But as the oldest, I am also expected to look after my siblings. I would have to pick them up from school sometimes when I had a class. And professors were always very understanding of my circumstances, knowing, hey, her parents work, and the only way the kids get picked up is if she leaves class early. So thankfully, my professors were always very understanding of that and accommodating, to know that I had to go at this certain time. My mom also ended up going through a cancer scare while I was in school, and as is, I take a lot of responsibility as the oldest daughter, but especially during that time, I was needed at home more than ever, and not only take on the roles of a mom, but as a student. And that was a very, very hard time during school. I felt like it was very hard to open up to my professors about what was going on, but ultimately, I went through a lot, like mentally, because that was a lot to carry, but my professors were very understanding, and I think that was possibly one of the hardest tribulations that I had to go through while in college. And I'm just thankful that I was able to get through it. But what I do wish I had done was I feel like at that time, everything was going so fast. I was expected to turn in my assignments. I was expected to look over my siblings, to look after my mom after surgery. It was a lot. but I wish I had taken some time just to breathe because I was just going everywhere. And thank you so much for writing this, Jackie, in the chat. You have to be more Mexican than the Mexicans, more American than the Americans. Yeah, I definitely felt that while I was in school. It was a struggle, but I really do thank my educators for being there for me. And that was definitely a turning point for me.
That's beautiful. Yeah, definitely. I think when it comes to like unexpected circumstances, I think someone wrote it on the chat too. If you don't choose a day for your body to rest, your body will choose it for you. And it seems like definitely when you became overwhelmed, it's like one thing you realize, like, I have to slow down. I have to take some time for me as well. And that's true. Like, as first generation students, I think we make it a thing to take care of everyone else but ourselves, and that can also be very unhealthy. And I think it's a conversation my friends and I also have, being first gen. Like, we're doing so much for our families. Even myself being 7 hours away, I'm still like trying to take care of everyone back home. And it's like, well, what am I doing for me, and I think that's important. Like, stop, reflect on, especially during your college career. Because if you don't do it now, then when? And like, your body will eventually shut down if you don't do it at the when it's needed. So yeah, thank you for sharing that, Kimberly. Definitely props to you for doing all that, because it sounds like a lot. And I think moving on to my next question, I think you kind of touched base on it, but we were talking about like educators showing up for you. So I guess in terms of mental health, do you think your professors and counselors did a good job? Which I think you said you're grateful for them showing up for you and checking in with you. But were there other times where you wish they would have better supported you, or yeah, is there another particular way that you wish your educators would show up for you?
Yeah, I think oftentimes, and I was involved in lots of organizations at school as well, especially for journalists. And something that's very talked about in the journalism community are mental health resources for journalists, just because of the things that we have to see. And it's very traumatizing sometimes. But I feel like oftentimes it's not enough to just put, hey, there's therapy is available at like so and so resource center. I feel like a poster is not enough. And if your teachers and educators really promote therapy and say, hey, like, I know that some of you are going through this, and if any of you ever need online therapy or just want someone to talk to, go here. So I feel like if we promote those services rather than just having it be on a piece of paper and that's enough promoting, I don't think that really helps out. And especially like as first gen students, it's like something that's very taboo within our culture. So we're already coming with like a bad sentiment towards therapy. So if we change the narrative around that, then I think that would help a lot. Exactly, like promoting healing circles. That's something that I know you said, like, at what age did you start realizing self-care? I feel like it comes in stages. And even now that I'm older, I realize I actually have a lot of healing to do that I didn't realize when I was in college, because it was always go, go, go. So now that I'm out, I'm like, whoa, how did I even do that? Like, I definitely need to, heal myself. And I wish I had taken advantage of the therapy that was given there, because sometimes it's free. And now that I'm out of college, I'm like, well, it's actually even harder to get a hold of therapists than it was in college. So if we can just promote that and change the narrative around therapy, then I think that would help a lot.
Yeah, for sure. I think therapy is one thing that is brought up in my circle too when we have these conversations of mental health as well. Like, making therapy accessible even when you're not in school. I think my sister has been very honest. She also went to CSUN. She didn't finish, but her first 2 years she was taking advantage of the therapy there, because one of her friends told her, like, there is free therapy. And like, when do you have free therapy? Like, when you're not a student. And it's like, she's right. Like, and you brought that up as well. Sometimes it's harder to access therapy after, graduating. And that's one thing we also have to acknowledge. Like, how do we show up for our students who are already done, when it comes to them still having to like take care of themselves and prioritize their mental health? What are we doing to make therapy accessible after college graduation? I think that's very important to acknowledge as well. And with that, like making time for therapy as well as a student, I think that's a reminder for myself as well, because like you said, sometimes it's just go 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 when you're in school and you don't have enough time to even stop to think like, oh, maybe, you know, sitting down and talking with someone might help. And then I think one of the things here in Berkeley, maybe it's different at CSUN, which hopefully it is. But the therapy here, it's free, but it's not easily accessible because we have a lot of students trying to access it at the same time. And that's one thing that a lot of us as students here acknowledge and call out on behalf of like the institution, like making therapy more accessible for us, hiring more therapists, and having counselors really direct us to how to access this therapy. Because a lot, like you said, a lot of them just send you the website or something like, oh, look into it, but don't tell you how, where is it, what time is therapy provided, you know, how easily accessible is it. I think having that honest conversation is important. So yeah, that's a beautiful reminder as well. Like, and I think as counselors right now, definitely like just advocating the importance of having therapy for all students, because like I said, like maybe at a space like Berkeley, I know this isn't the only school that deals with having inaccessible therapy, and if other campuses are also dealing with inaccessible therapy for our students, I think as counselors, as academics, as educators, we can all do a job in like advocating for that issue and like saying like, you know, as a school you should show up for your students a lot more, and like always advocating for, you know, accessible therapy in all these spaces. So really good point. Thank you for bringing that up. I think moving on to just the last question, I think just kind of wanting to acknowledge exam season. I think when we talk about mental health and self-care, a lot of like exam season is really brought up because I think as students now we're really being able to like acknowledge the testing anxiety that comes with, you know, midterms and finals and all of that. I know I suffer with a lot of testing anxiety, and I think that's where like my mental health seems to be drained out the most, because I kind of lose myself in all this like studying and all this like prep for that exam, that I realized, whoa, I have not been getting like my proper 7 to 8 hours of sleep, or I haven't even been able to like hydrate as much throughout my day because I forget. And it's like something so easy that like you could do that you don't, because you're so caught up in, you know, like the exam. So during exam season, what would you say your self-care routine like looked different while when you were in school, or was there anything in particular that you did to deal with the anxiety that comes with like test taking?
Yeah, thank you for bringing that question up. Being that I lived at home, I would. It's very strange because in a way, school was my safe place, and so was home. When I needed to escape from school, I would come home, and when I needed to escape from home, I would go to school. And so I feel like I kind of lived like the Zoom life before, because when it was time to study for exam season, I couldn't study at home because my mom is cooking, my dad is doing something outside, my brother and my sister are screaming. So I would just go to school and study there. And it was a safe place because it was quiet and everybody's in the same zone as I am. Whereas at home, it was a circus. So I think I would run to school whenever I needed a safe, quiet place to study for exams. And there it was people that understood what I was going through. Whereas at home, my mom's like, oh my gosh, you've studied for 4 hours. Like, come help me in the kitchen, you know? And I'm like, it's not that easy, but I can't even blame them because they don't understand, because they didn't go to college. They don't understand the things that I'm studying for. And so it's hard sometimes to like for them to understand where I'm coming from or why I'm spending so much time at school. They feel like I'm neglecting them. So the way that I would just split my time, especially during exam season, and go to school and stay the majority of the time there and come home really late and literally spend whatever it was, like 5 minutes with my parents at the end of the day, let them know how it was going and do it all over again. But yeah, definitely school was my safe place in terms of exam seasons.
I'm glad you had that. And I definitely kind of related to that because, like you said, I think because of COVID, I was back home because we were all on Zoom. I'm like, save a little rent money, let me go back home. And it was a different experience. I think I didn't realize how different it would be. So shout out to commuters as well, because studying at home is just a different vibe, like you said. especially when you're from a first gen Latinx family with your mom cooking and like just a bunch of noise in the house. I would sometimes hop on Zoom for class and there'd be a bunch of noise and in my house, and I'm like, I am so sorry. But I think that's also one of the good things about Zoom and like what the pandemic brought. We also really acknowledge, at least in my classrooms, I think a lot of my professors acknowledge like we all have so much going on at home. If there's background noise, if there's a dog barking, if there's a kid crying, it's like we all have different circumstances we're facing. And I think that's also important to realize and acknowledge, because yeah, sometimes you can't even study at home because there's a lot going on. And so I'm glad you were also able to do that and like have that balance with like you said, I think you live close to your campus, so being able to have that as well and like kind of being like, there's so much going on right now, I'm gonna go to campus for a bit, try to get some work done. I'm glad that I was able to like provide a little bit of relief on your end. But yeah, thank you so much for sharing, Kimberly, and like shout out to you again for everything that you've done. Congrats on graduating as a first gen. Prioritizing still your mental health and like having these conversations is still very much important. And like we said, like just finding out the ways that we still have to take care of ourselves even after finishing our college education at the moment, like realizing, whoa, there's still a lot of work that has to be done. It's important. And I'm glad that we're able to acknowledge it through this conversation. And I kind of just wanted to acknowledge the chat for a little bit. I see a lot of people really relating to like what you've shared, and just wanted to shout out a bunch of people on here on the chat who have sent out kind messages to you as well if you're reading them. I think Jackie said when we went remote, I made Zoom backgrounds for kids so they could hide the family life from their peers and advocated for camera off. Yes, camera off. Sometimes a lot of things got hectic, and like some educators would be like, no, you have to have your camera on, and I think that was also inaccessible as well. So thank you, Jackie, for also bringing in that conversation because it's important. And yeah, someone said student fees and tuitions often cover campus student therapy costs. Good point on guidance for support after graduation. That's true. For students, please always know that student fees, you're paying for that therapy. Take advantage of it. You're paying for these services. I think if we're still on the topic of like exam season and like taking care of yourself, I'm hoping a lot of other schools do this, but like during finals and midterms, a lot of like my communal like spaces on campus that center around POC or students of color, like they send out self-care packages, and they send out like a lot of like face mask and like things you could do for yourself during exam season, which I think could also be helpful. And they're free as well because they're free, but you're paying for them through like your tuition. So as a student, please take advantage of that, and as an educator, please always be on the lookout for that during exam season, and like send it out to your students so they could know, so they could take advantage of these things.
Sherry, I just wanted to acknowledge your question. Did you find that financial pressure was a big issue and something you worried a lot? So for example, in my case, I didn't get any financial aid. Everything was paid out of pocket. So I definitely resonate with your question. I didn't, like I mentioned, I didn't get any financial aid. Everything was paid out of pocket. And it was a lot of pressure to do well in school. And maybe not so much because of FAFSA, because I know you have to like reach a certain GPA, but more so from my parents, because I felt this is being paid for out of pocket. And if I'm not making the grades, I'm definitely failing my family. On top of that, my dad is the only person who works. So it was a lot of pressure on my dad. That was also one of the reasons why I chose to go to school so close, because I wouldn't have to pay for housing. And it was also a really great option financially, at least for us. It was one of the smarter decisions to go with. On top of that, I wish that I did apply to scholarships, and I was able to get a really great help towards the end of I think I was a senior, and it covered the cost for the majority of my senior year. And I just wish that I had known about it sooner. But definitely that was a great help for my dad and for my family. And now that my sister, she's a class of 2022, and she's going to be going off to college. Now the college amount that we're facing is a whole lot more than it was at CSUN. And so we're just figuring out how we're going to make that happen for her. But now that I'm out of school, I'm able to send her scholarships and tell her apply, apply, apply. That's something that I wish that I had known, because most of the time students don't even apply. They're there and they either don't know about it or don't apply for it. But yeah, the financial burden was definitely weighing heavy on the shoulders while I was in school. So thank you so much for asking that question.
Yeah, thank you, Kimberly, for also bringing it up. I think I completely missed it on the chat. And I think that's a perfect segue to our resources. And like you said, like your sister who may need help with scholarships, definitely send her over to the Let's Go website. So we could go over to the next slide.
Yeah, so when we're talking about on-campus resources, we have a ton of things that could help students on their journey. For example, online therapy, which is now an option because of COVID. My school offered a lot of resources like nap pods where students could take the time to really de-stress and meditate. I think also students that battle with like mental health issues can go towards like their campus resources as far as like medicines or whatever it is they may need, because often that's taboo to talk about in POC culture. There's also study groups and organizations like Anai mentioned that really help create a sense of community, as well as like physical health. Oftentimes we're so busy, we're always on the go, that we don't realize oftentimes we're paying for these gyms that we don't even go to. So I think it's like a great opportunity to de-stress in whatever that may look like. And also just really taking care of our bodies, I think can help too. And I was there an on-campus resource that you would say you really like frequented when you were at Berkeley?
Lately it's been the gym. I think that's more like mental health side. I think academic, there's what we call Styles Hall, and it's connected to campus, but it's also like a nonprofit across the street from our campus, and it's just where a bunch of like students of color, underrepresented students, meet up, study together, and luckily they were able to advocate for a good amount of funding that we deserve, and so nicer computers and like area to study for us is dedicated at Styles Hall, so that's specifically for first gen students of color. And I think that's the resource I've been using the most, because through there you find other resources, because that's where a bunch of other organizations meet, and then you get in contact with a bunch of people who help you with like scholarships or anything else that you need. I find it at Styles Hall, so that's one of the advantages that I have found at Berkeley, and one of like my favorite resources there, for sure. Yeah.
Thank you, Anai.
Thank you, and I think we can move on as we start to wrap up our presentation. We wanted to thank you all for joining us today and for tuning in, and for just being a part of this lovely conversation. Thank you for always just like participating in the chat. But of course, as a virtual hub, we love staying connected with folks. So please make sure to follow us on Instagram, where we plug in several resources. We post daily, and these resources aren't only academic. So please make sure you or someone you know is taking advantage of these resources. We post scholarships, just tips on like taking care of yourself as well. We're very honest about like what it's like to be a first generation student. Our Instagram is ran by myself and other interns like Kimberly, and we're all students. We've all been students at the time at some point in our lives, and so we post, just relatable content and content that we think could be of help to students who may need it. You can access our Instagram by scanning the QR code on the screen, or by following the link if someone could drop it on the chat. And as mentioned before, we also have a TikTok. Our TikTok is actually ran by our student ambassadors. And so at Let's Go to College, we have an ambassador program, which is all students. And so right now we're running our 2022 ambassador program. If you want to know more about it, you can also head over to our Instagram where we talk more. Our ambassadors specifically create content for our TikTok. Our TikTok is fairly new, and it's where we post more of our funny, relatable content. So if you ever just want to laugh, if you want a little break and you still want to feel like you're being seen by first gen students, head over to our TikTok. I honestly really love the content that our ambassadors put out. I am currently running the ambassador program with Anna and another intern, Amaya. And we just kind of have fun with this program and allow them to like produce content that they wish they would see as first gen students. Scrolling through TikTok, and so we just kind of like our goal through the TikTok is to just provide relatable content for everyone. And so, yeah, we hope you stay connected. If you are ever in need of any other resources, we also have our website, which is www.letsgotocollegeca.org. And through that, you can also share that with your students. I know I worked closely with one of my old high school teacher, and I plugged in a lot of Let's Go resources last year during the pandemic, because a lot of these students that it was a high school I used to attend, they weren't really prioritizing their FAFSA or applying to college because everything was online, and they kind of like tuned themselves out from school. But through like plugging in Let's Go resources, they were able to like find some help online, because obviously it wasn't accessible in person at the time because of COVID. And even up until now that we're still transitioning back to in person, I find that the Let's Go resources are a huge help to students who sometimes have trouble asking for help in person. So if you ever want to plug in these resources, please, please, please make sure to share to your students, anyone else who may need help. That's what we're here for. And if there's anything else you would ever like to see on our website or on our Instagram or anything like that, please reach out to us. That's why we want to stay connected virtually. But yeah, once again, thank you so much for joining us. It was a pleasure being here.
Thank you very much for sharing your expertise with all of our participants this morning. Please know that all of the presentation materials will be available on the SCED event platform. The recordings will be posted on the CSEC event webpage by tomorrow. We also welcome you to use the SCED to provide feedback so we can continue to provide you with the support you need to implement the upcoming application completion requirements. Please don't forget to join Marlene Garcia for closing remarks. And thank you so much for attending the 3rd Annual California College Affordability Summit. We hope to see you again next year.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, thank you.
Bye.